So if you followed along this morning's reading, you'll be happy to know that I do not plan on talking about it. Unfortunately, what I do want to talk about is much more difficult, much messier, and much more weighty on the soul. This week marked Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's 77th year of existence. Yom HaAtzmaut is a day for celebrating the establishment of the State of Israel, truly one of the most remarkable accomplishments of the Jewish people in the last century. We rejoice in the return to our ancient homeland, the way that it has been built up and transformed into a land that truly does flow with milk and honey. It has been a font of innovation and industry. It has been a place which has seen the revival of Hebrew as a language not just of prayer and perhaps of poetry, but it is a language of conversation and everyday discourse. It is an opportunity to celebrate the role that Israel has played as a refuge for Jews from around the world, from the time even before its existence when it welcomed the survivors of the Shoah, to the Jews who came from the Arab countries after the declaration of the state, to the Soviet Jews who came, the Ethiopian Jews, to the Jews from Uganda, to the Jews that just want to go and settle in our ancestral land. All this and so much more is reason to celebrate. And yet, this year, the celebration feels hollow. For all that I just enumerated, this was a hard year to celebrate because there's also so much more that is weighing on the soul, weighing on mine. From the simple reality of wildfires that burned near Jerusalem, with thousands of acres being destroyed, it was a natural disaster, but it was also a human-made one. The coalition government rebuffed requests from the opposition to hold fire preparedness discussions over the months that preceded. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir blocked the purchase of firefighting helicopters. And as a result, in addition to all the carnage that was created, many Yom HaAtzmaut events had to be canceled. So even on a superficial level, the celebration was not what it could have been. But on a deeper level, trying to celebrate this year just highlighted how much Israel and the Jewish world is still reeling from the brutal attacks by Hamas on October 7th, by the fact that 59 hostages, both living and dead, remain in Gaza, in spite of the fact that over 70% of Israelis want to do whatever is necessary, end the combat in Gaza and bring them home. In conflicting statements this week, the high-ranking IDF officials, including Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, who entered the role 2 months ago, said on several occasions that returning the hostages is his top priority, a priority that echoes exactly what his dismissed predecessor, Herzl Halevi, also said, that returning the hostages is a more urgent matter than any other goals, because we need to bring an end to their suffering and to the suffering of the families, and we need to give dignified burial to those who died. Those tasked with the real responsibility on the ground understand where to place their priorities. Unfortunately, the leadership of the state of Israel is not listening to them. In a competing statement on the same day that Zamir made one of his statements, Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that the primary goal is the defeat of Hamas, refusing to acknowledge that this is not working, refusing to acknowledge that the overwhelming majority of the country don't support the ongoing war in Gaza, that there were far too many families who on Yom HaZikaron, on the day of remembrance before Yom HaAtzmaut, were mourning the losses for the first year of loved ones who died in Gaza, while tens of thousands are being recruited, are being called back into active duty. He's not listening to his own military personnel. Instead, the IDF continues to engage in active warfare with a goal that is unattainable and with not even a sense of what will happen afterwards, even if the miraculous happened and it became attainable. In the West Bank, Mr. Netanyahu has tutted the ongoing attacks on Palestinian villages, often carried out, if not with state backing, then with a wink and a nod from Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is in charge of security on the West Bank. And the displacement of Palestinians is the highest since 1967. Part of what this week exposed was the growing and worsening rift within Israeli society between those who want Israel to remain a democracy for all of its citizens and those who promote a messianic settler agenda and are happy to preserve a perpetual state of war. These attacks are not just outward focused. Earlier this week, a Kahanist mob attacked a Reform synagogue in Ra'anana that was screening the joint Israeli-Palestinian memorial ceremony. For those of you who don't know, there's an annual event that's been hosted by a parents' circle called Combatants for Peace. It is a space which brings Israeli and Palestinian families together to share their stories of loss. Whether I support it or not is irrelevant to the fact that it should not have come under vicious attack and assault. And these were not just a few bad apples the way Netanyahu sought to dismiss it, but rather his incitement of violence towards Palestinians and progressive Jews in his own state helped drive this attack. Chaverim, not just over there. The same Itamar Ben-Gvir who would, if given free rein, remove every Arab from the West Bank, from Gaza, even from Israel itself. He decided that perhaps he would spend this week of Yom Ha'atzmaut here in the United States, a bracha. And so he's visiting the headquarters of the Chabad Lubavitch movement in Brooklyn, and he was greeted by scores of protesters. And during the visit, a Brooklyn woman was left fearing for her life when a mob of Orthodox Jews mistook her for a protester, kicking her, spitting on her, and pelting her with objects and chasing her through the streets of Brooklyn. The woman, a local resident in her 30s, had come outside after hearing police helicopters, and in part out of fear, in part because she didn't want to be caught on camera, covered her face with a scarf. And so hundreds of men who chased after her thought she was one of the group of protesters. They shouted at her. They threatened to rape her. As the chants grew louder and the pursuit grew more dangerous, a lone police officer intervened, escorted her to safety in his car. The car was followed by hundreds of men shouting in Hebrew and in English, "This is America!" Therefore, we've got Israel now. We've got an army, others shouted. The depth of the irony that these men are shouting about an army that they refuse to serve in is a shanda on top of a shanda. When did we as Jews get into the business of perpetrating pogroms against Palestinian villages, against Reform Jews in Israel, against people with whom we disagree? When did we buy into that? And how do you celebrate Israel when it's being destroyed from within, even more than it is being destroyed from without? I look forward to this week in a quirky sort of way, because it allows me to take myself back to those two moments when I was in Israel and I was able to commemorate Yom HaZikaron and celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut. Both times enriched by the community of Israelis with whom I was embedded. Hard for us sometimes, I get it. But when you commemorate Yom HaZikaron in Israel, and you're sitting in the town hall that is filled to overflowing, and you're sitting next to someone who lost a son, and another person who lost a brother, and another person who lost an uncle and a cousin, there's not a single family that is untouched, and you hear their anguish. You also hear their pride. And I think that is what enables them to flip the switch from sadness to celebration, because they recognize the blessing of a state that was given to them by the sacrifice of all of these people who they knew and loved. They're confronted by government who doesn't listen to them, doesn't even seem to care about their sacrifice anymore. This was a hard week. But it does mean that we need to raise our voices. It can't be left to others to say what happened in Brooklyn was wrong, what happened in Ra'anana was wrong, what's happening on the West Bank is wrong, what's happening in Gaza is wrong. Because I want to stand with 70% of Israel. I've said this before, that I'm not a big messianist. And it's for reasons like this. Because it allows a distortion of what we stand for as Jews. It empowers people to commit atrocities in the name of God and in the name of Yiddishkeit. And we cannot stand by and let it pass without anger and response. Not response in kind, but response that says, we have to be what we envisioned Israel to be when it was founded. Think about Israel was meant to represent. Or Ben-Gurion and those others who took literally their lives in their hands to declare the state. They had a vision, a dream that the third commonwealth of the Jewish people would finally be the one to fulfill the prophetic vision of Or LaGoyim, to be a light, an exemplar for what it means to be a state that truly cares about all of its citizens, to be an example of how you exercise power with moral authority. I can only imagine of the ghosts in Independence Hall in Tel Aviv feeling today. I think this week, the first time I can ever remember in my life being embarrassed by my state. It was the worst feeling I can imagine. So I speak to you. And I hope you will speak to others, because that is the only way to raise our voices and say, we have to live up to the dream, the ideal, and if not live up to it fully, at least aspire towards it. And that has to be our clarion call in the days and the weeks ahead. God willing, a year from now, we come to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut and do it with full hearts, with uplifted souls. Chaverim, let me invite you to return to your Sidurim, and we continue with Chatzi Kaddish, which introduces the Musaf service.